Hello and welcome to the Everything Weather Podcast, where we talk with people about the weather world, explore and discuss everything weather, and have a little fun along the way. I'm your host, Kyle David, and today on the podcast, we're excited to have Andrew Markowitz. Andrew is an energy meteorologist with Excel Energy in Denver, Colorado. He also has a growing weather presence on social media, particularly on TikTok, where he posts weather and climate content for hundreds of thousands of viewers. Hey there, Andrew, and welcome to the Everything Weather Podcast.
Hey, Kyle, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to having an insightful and fun conversation. And speaking of fun, I've got our first game for you. So we have Rank These. I've got a weather-themed and a non-weather-themed one. We'll do the weather-themed one first. So we have Rank These bad weather sports games without knowing what comes next. So first up, we have the Ice Bowl of 1967. For reference, that was the Packers versus Cowboys.
So, what does a higher ranking mean? Is it like a more exciting game or like just a worse weather event?
Oh, okay. So good question. Usually how we do it is on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being like best for your preference, 5 being the worst. So this is totally your scale, Andrew. We can go either way with it, either good game or worse event.
Yeah, we'll do worse event. So, Ice Bowl, I'd probably put at number 2.
Okay, number 2. That's probably one of the better known weather games. And we've got some other weather games here in store for you. So next up, we have the snow game with the Packers versus Browns in 2024. So a more recent game that occurred.
Oh, I personally love that game. It wasn't really a great game to watch from a fan perspective, but I love the scenery. So I want to put it at number 1. Actually, I'll put it number 1 because I think snow games are the best all around. Also, I don't think it was brutally cold either. It was just a winter wonderland. So we'll do 1 for that.
It was a very beautiful game to watch. And that's going to make things very interesting for the rest of the list now that you have the 1 and 2 spot occupied. So next up, we have the Fog Bowl of 1988. This was the playoffs between the Bears and the Eagles.
Yeah, Fog Bowl, I remember that well, not watching it, but just I know what happens in it. I mean, the thing is, I don't think fog is very exciting. I think it's just very eerie. But that being said, I mean, it was the Eagles Bears. They both had great defenses, so I feel like that was a good atmosphere for it. So for that one, I'll put number 3.
Okay. And like you said, it's just eerie more than that. And I've heard from people that said the quarterback would toss the ball, the receiver would run, and then like be gone like in less than a yard.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the footage from the game. You literally couldn't see the field. It was like actually there's a lore of like the Eagles announcers, Mel Reese, couldn't even see the field. They had to have somebody down to actually see what was going on. So just wild.
Very wild game. Maybe we'll see that again in the future. Who knows? All right, next up we have the 2025 AFC divisional between the Ravens and Bills. So again, another more recent game.
That one, I don't remember there being snow at that one.
There was some snow. It wasn't like the snow game or in 2024 between the Packers and Browns or other snow games, but it played a significant part in the play because it made things very slippery.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lake effect event. There was that cold front that came in, it made it really cold, and that was lake effect. But that one, I mean, I'll probably go with number 4 on that one, just because, like, I feel like the next one's probably gonna be worse by default.
Before I say the next one, in my eyes, that's probably at number 5 because I am personally a Ravens fan, and watching the slippery conditions go against the Ravens' play for the game hurt. So in my mind, it's at number 5. But that leaves the number 5 spot open for this game, and this is going to be an interesting list. So at number 5, you have the Tuck Rule game from 2002 with the Raiders and Patriots.
I mean, if I knew what the list was, that would be unequivocally number 1 as a Patriots fan. Unfortunately, I have no choice but to put it at the bottom, so I definitely screwed this up.
So if you could swap it, you'd put the Tuck Rule game at number 1.
Oh, unequivocally number 1.
And then bump all the other ones down a notch?
Everything else moved down.
That's the fun of Rank These. You don't know what's going to come next. I've got one more for you. Rank these pizza places without knowing what comes next. So first up, we have Blue Pan Pizza in Denver, Colorado.
Wow, I was not expecting to have that on the list. Blue Pans, I've had it before. My personal rating was somewhere in the sevens. It's like Detroit style pizza, probably one of the better ones you can get out here. I have a hunch though, there's going to be some good East Coast pizza places out ahead of it. So I'm going to put it number 4.
Okay, that's a conservative call for the other ones. You may not know what comes next. Next up, we have Cafe Sidley in Wilmington, Delaware.
Oh, that's number 5.
Oh, how come number 5 for that one?
So, I mean, we in Wilmington, Delaware, if we had to pick one place, it would be Mazzella's. Italy, just not a fan of it. So, I think number 5. If I was to have anybody come into Wilmington, that would definitely not be my choice of pizza.
Yeah, Dave Portnoy from Barstool has some very interesting ratings of pizza places. Some are justified. There are some in New Jersey that are a little inflated or underrated, in my opinion. So we have Blue Pan for Cafe Sidley, number 5. Next up, we have Canyon Pizza in State College, Pennsylvania.
I'm going to put this one at number 3. And it's objectively bad pizza according to most people's opinion. But what I will say is that when you're walking on Beaver Avenue at 2 o'clock in the morning, you may or may not be sober. It does the job and it's pretty cheap. So I think from a dollar perspective, it's really not as bad as people think. So I think number 3 is actually a justifiable position here.
Okay. And I don't think there's an equivalent because you went to Penn State. We'll get to that a little bit. I don't think there's an equivalent for that for Rutgers, although we'd have Are You Hungry for fat sandwiches, but that's not really pizza.
Yeah, I've heard good things about that actually.
I will say if you haven't gone there, if you're in New Jersey, definitely just give it a try once just to say you've had it, but it's very fatty.
Is that something you can have during the day, or is that something that you would wait until 2 or 3 in the morning?
I mean, you could have it during the day, but no promises you'll be able to function properly. It's proper drunk food, I will say.
Hey, I mean, there's a time and a place for that, so that works.
Definitely. All right, and just to clarify, we have the number 1 and 2 spots left, so this is going to be a very interesting list. So next up, we have DeFazio's in Albany, New York.
Oh, I'm not sure how you pulled that, but when I was in Albany for this, I was AMS Mind the Gap. I made it a point to go to DeFazio's because I saw Dave Portnoy's review. It was not only for the pizza, but he had this insane cake after. So that one, I feel like there's going to be a heavy hitter number 1. So I'm going to go with number 2, but I feel good about that. If you're ever in the capital region, definitely a good place to try.
And how was the hangover cake?
Oh, it was amazing.
So what is it exactly? Just curious.
I don't exactly remember, but whatever, it was very good.
All right, and I do my deep dive when it comes to my guests, so make things fun and interesting. So with that, that leaves the number 1 spot for De Lorenzo's in Trenton, New Jersey.
Oh, number 1, easy.
So you're happy with that list as is?
I honestly, I think I nailed that list. I mean, maybe I could switch the 3 and the 4, but otherwise, this list is much better than the first one.
Kind of did a little planning on that based on where the best pizza is, because New Jersey, New York, maybe a little bit of PA has the best pizza. Some people in Connecticut say they have the best pizza, but that's somewhat debatable.
A lot of people would say New Haven would be number 1.
It's an interesting style, but yeah, it's good pizza. All right, that's our rank these. So let's get into the weather stuff. So everybody I have on the podcast, I talk about their weather story in the context of the business. We talk about the weather story as if, what's the day's weather, the week's weather, so on and so forth. But here I talk about it with what different experiences that you've gained along your way to get you interested in the weather. So tell me, Andrew, what is your weather story and what got you interested in everything weather?
The interesting thing about meteorologists is that this is one of those fields where the majority of people have actually known they've wanted to do it since they were very young. And for me, I'm no exception. The interesting thing about me is there wasn't a specific storm that really brought me into weather. I think I was just interested in like looking at the sky, seeing how things worked. I read a lot of books about the weather when I was younger, like picture books. And then I always had the Weather Channel on. So I think it was just a matter of I was interested in the science and how the world worked. And then As I got a little bit older, so we're talking first, second grade, my main obsession became snow and specifically big nor'easters. Because early mid 2000s was the golden age for snow, where every year you'd pretty much be guaranteed to have one big storm. And that's what I got accustomed to. And then when I was 7, so this is 2004, I won a contest to be the guest weather person on NBC 10 in Philadelphia. And this was a contest at the Franklin Institute for people that were ages 6 to 15. Basically went up, you read a script, and I was the one who wore a bow tie because that's his marquee appearance here, is like he's known for wearing a bow tie, Glenn Hurricane Schwartz. I feel like that's probably one of the reasons I won, but also maybe just I was very passionate. I won the audience over. And then doing the weather on TV and bragging about it to my classmates the day of and subsequently after being in the newspaper, that was something that always stuck with me. And I think that really made me want to do that as a career when I grew up. So it's like when everybody asks, what do you want to be when you grew up? There was never any other answer besides meteorologist. And then there were some other things that built along the way. Like when I was 12 years old or going on 13 for my bar mitzvah in December 2009. And for context here, December snowstorms in the mid-Atlantic are very rare. And this snowstorm in December 2009 happened on the day of my bar mitzvah, which in the Judaism religion, that's basically a turning point for a young man's life. Basically the day he turns from a boy to a man. So it's very important. And for me, seeing that big snowstorm happen, and my parents always said that I was the only kid that would ever be excited about that happening. But that was something that if there was some higher power, which like I'm not the most religious or spiritual person, that was probably the clear sign that yes, meteorology was indeed my destiny. And the best part was I had the part of it was canceled because of a state of emergency, but it ended up working out that I got to have two parties. One the day of, which was abridged, and then a second one later in the spring. We had to wait till the end of March just to be safe. But all of those things together, and then being known as the district weatherman, where I was predicting all the snow days, and that carried on in college. So that all inspired me to go to Penn State. Also, the reason I went to Penn State was because I went to a weather camp during senior year, which it does exist. And just knowing that there was a community out there of other weather enthusiasts that made me want to be a part of it. So a lot of these things in my childhood just built up and inspired me to go on the path that I did. And there are not many people out there that can say they live their lifelong dream every day. So putting that all together, I feel incredibly blessed to have been on a journey like this.
Wow. So a lot of different weather circumstances that have influenced you along the way, from your award that you got at the Franklin Institute with that competition to your bar mitzvah, the 2009 snowpocalypse, which is the snowstorm that affected you. And on that note, like there were 2 December 2009 snowstorms, which is, like you said before, it's rare, but to get 2 of them in the same month, that's even more rare.
So that was just the one, but then there were 2 storms in February of that same winter that were back to back. Like that winter was the snowiest winter of all time in the Mid-Atlantic, and I don't think I'll ever see anything like that again. In fact, with that second snowstorm in February 2010, I actually remember feeling sad because I was like, this is a once in a lifetime thing. I'm never going to see this again. So yeah, just experiencing that at the age of 13, that was a winter unlike anything I've ever seen. I think the only thing that would have been better is if I lived in Boston during January, February 2015. But aside from that, that was something I'll never forget.
Geez, it's almost as if you forecasted the snow trends, because I feel like as of late things have quieted down in terms of snow across the Northeast.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the last winter I was in the Northeast was 21, 22, and the jackpot that region was basically Boston to the South Shore where I was living. And we had the 2-footer blizzard. And after that, they've become allergic to snow. So it's almost like it was somewhat prescient to move out to Denver, where we've had some pretty good winters the last couple years. From that perspective, it's definitely worked out in my favor. The thing about Denver winter storms in the East Coast is that often the patterns are inverse of one another. Like a good snowstorm pattern in Denver would usually lead to torching in the East Coast, whereas whenever you have the East Coast being favored for snow, usually you got a big P&A ridge out here and there's not much going on. So usually for me to root for snow here, I have to subsequently root against snow back home, back on the East Coast.
It's like a tug and pull. You want to root for snow for your home place, Pennsylvania Northeast, but you also want to root for snow for where you're currently living in Colorado. So it's like a catch-22 in a way.
I mean, maybe it's selfish, but I'll always root for myself first. If I have the opportunity, I would spread the wealth back in the Northeast, but ultimately, I just want to see snow falling out my window wherever I'm at.
You gotta wish for that. So I actually want to go back to talking about your competition that you participated in. You wore a bow tie to emulate the style of Glenn Hurricane Schwartz. I'm curious, what are some weather idols that you've picked up along the way? Was Hurricane Schwartz one? And what are some things that you picked up from those idols that you now apply to your current job or be it your studies at Penn State?
Yeah, Glenn Hurricane Schwartz was always the number one idol that I looked up to growing up, just because of my personal experience with him, but also just because the biggest thing I liked from him was his winter forecast, where he would explain all the science behind it. Like, I knew that he not only had a great TV presence, but he also had the scientific background, and specifically that Penn State education. So he was the first person I looked up to. Jim Cantori is another big one, just being on the Weather Channel, being out in these different storms. And that always looks super fun to me and something that I wanted to do. There's a lot of people that I've found on social media over the past, I'd say at this point, about a decade, where I think they have very interesting careers. They do a great job of explaining the science and communicating. And when I talk to people, both in my job and on social media, I emulate a lot of the things that they say. I find that when you're someone who's on social media, a lot of the time, the best approach would be to first of all, sit back and learn from others, to take some time to do that. And then I also think to try to stick your neck out on the line and try to predict things and just see how it goes. So I don't know, there's a lot of people out there that I follow that I like what they do, and I try to incorporate that in my own stuff and also try to put my own unique spin on this. And this is probably going into an entirely different realm here, but I do think it's very important to also, in addition to looking up to people, also having mentors in the field. I'd say having mentors has been instrumental in personal growth, but also professional growth, and specifically moving up very quickly in my career.
I'm curious, who were some of those mentors that helped you grow professionally and personally in your journey to where you are now?
I'd say the first person that really helped me was Todd Crawford, because he was my mentor as part of the AMS BPS mentorship program, a program where I later became the person running it as the board chair. And so when I was matched up with him senior year, I wasn't 100% locked in on a career path. I knew that private sector is probably the way to go, but he introduced me to a day in the life of the energy sector. And that was something that swayed me into going into that direction after getting my first job. And so I was at my first job for a little over a year, and I realized that while it was a great opportunity, there were opportunities in the energy sector that I thought would be more up my alley. And I was trying to do whatever I could to get an in, because when I was graduating, there weren't really any opportunities that appealed to me. You have to have experience before getting an energy job, which is somewhat of a catch-22, because how does one get experience without jobs that are entry level? And so Todd Crawford was able to connect me to other mentors in the field. I would say the most well-known person is Matt Lanza, who is a excellent meteorologist down in Houston. He works in the energy sector, and he also does a lot of communication stuff on the sideline. So he's someone that I look up to a lot to try to emulate his style. But it was him. There were some other people, and I would say among that group of people, Sam Larson is probably the one who's most instrumental for me coming to Excel, because he was the meteorologist at Excel Energy in Denver, Colorado. And he is someone that I talk to on a somewhat regular basis about the energy sector, meteorology as a whole. And I always thought his job was very interesting. So then fast forward to 2022, the position was posted online. I decided to apply for it just because why not? There's nothing to lose. And sure enough, I ended up getting through the interview process, got offered the position, and I ended up taking it. It ended up completely changing my life. And it was something that I wasn't really sure of at the time, but was absolutely the best move. So if I was not proactive in terms of building a social media presence, reaching out to people on both LinkedIn and Twitter, and nurturing these different relationships with mentors, I certainly would not be in that position. So by doing all of these things, I think that put me well ahead of my peers who may not have been quite as proactive.
Definitely, social media is an important marketing tool, and way to get yourself out there. And we're definitely going to touch upon that later on in our conversation. But I'm curious because you, at a young age, did this Franklin Institute competition where you emulated Glenn Hurricane Schwartz, who's a prominent broadcast figure, but you're in energy meteorology now. So I'm curious what influenced you to go in the route of energy meteorology instead of broadcast meteorology.
When I was growing up, and then even into the beginning of college, when I think of a meteorologist, I think of being on TV and being on the green screen. And I'm someone that I do like the attention. I do like people. I do like having it where my forecasts matter tangibly to people. And so when I went to Penn State, originally my thought was going on TV. However, once I learned more about the industry, I learned that there were a lot of downsides associated with it. And as someone who paid out of state tuition and incurred a significant amount of student debt, from a math perspective, it just did not make sense for me to go into that. I didn't really like the direction that the industry was going. There were a lot of downsides, and I didn't think that ultimately it was the best choice for me. What got me interested in energy was actually from a young age because my grandpa on my mom's side worked for many years in the oil and energy industry, specifically at Exxon. And there was one day in third grade, he came down from New York to speak to my class and went over his career. And I always thought what he did was very interesting. And I saw that with that career, he also was able to provide a very nice life for my family. So I always thought, okay, if weather didn't work out, then that could be another avenue that I'd find interesting. I'd probably be good at it. And when I got to Penn State, I realized first year that there was actually a weather risk option. And with the weather risk option, that was basically meteorology, but tailored to business continuity needs. And one of those things was energy. And so that inspired me to take on an energy business and finance minor. And it combined these two different interests into one. So energy was just the perfect marriage of my lifelong passion for weather, along with this business and finance sector that I think is an emerging field.
Interesting. And that opens up for some other conversation about finances and business down the road. But I want to explore eventually how you went from Penn State to your current role at Excel Energy. So picture this, you're graduating from Penn State, you're walking the stage, getting your diploma. What was next for you?
So I graduated from Penn State in May of 2019. When I graduated, I didn't have a job, but I did get my first job shortly after in July of 2019. So that first job, I was working as an environmental intelligence analyst at a company called World Aware, who is a travel risk management company. Basically, what I would do for that is I would look at severe weather all around the world. If there was something that impacted business continuity needs of our different clients, I would write up these reports that would say, this is the weather event. It's occurring on these days in these locations. This is what's going to happen. And these are the things you need to do to prepare. So I always thought it was very interesting to not just forecast the weather, but take the next step, but also learning about weather patterns aside from the US. That was really the first exposure I had. And it really opened my eyes of how interconnected weather is all around the world. But also there are some intricacies in other countries that I didn't really know much about. And so I was there for about a year and a half. And during that time was the COVID lockdown. So initially it was a 5 day a week going to an office, which I didn't really think much of. I thought that was the standard practice. And then March 2020, like pretty much everyone else, we went remotely, and we were remote throughout the entire process. And actually that ended up working out in my favor. Number one, because I found out that I actually like remote work better than in person. But number two, that made the transition to my next job much more seamless, because with that remote flexibility, I could just run out the clock on my lease. And then once that was over, I could move into the new location, which was from Annapolis, Maryland, where the first job was, to Boston.
And were you originally from Boston, or did you just end up in Boston because of the role that you were going into?
So I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, but I moved to Boston for the role. When I was younger, Boston was always the place I wanted to live. I mean, I always had a lifelong idea of I would go to Boston. Number one, I was always envious that they would get the snow and we wouldn't most of the time. Number two, growing up a Patriots fan, Celtics fan, also having family there made it very appealing. And then later on, realizing that they have mountains, they have beach, they have the best education and the best healthcare in the country. So all around, it felt like the place that would be ideal to live. And I thought that I would just stick around for a while. Sometimes the best opportunities in life come when you're not necessarily looking for them.
So that's interesting that you mentioned that some opportunities come to you when you least expect them. How did it come to you, that Excel opportunity?
It was just a matter of me going on LinkedIn one day and seeing the job was posted, and I decided I had nothing to lose, so I would just go for it, apply, and just see what would happen. I did not really expect that I would get it. One thing led to another. They made an offer, and I decided that if I didn't take it, I would always wonder. Whereas if I took it, I could always, then I would have my answer. And if I didn't like it, then I could always just come back. But as it turns out, I'm here still 2.5 years later.
And I'm curious, what keeps you in that? And what's the day-to-day life that you find the most pleasurable and sometimes the most frustrating?
In terms of day to day, working for a large utility company, the work you do is very important. There is not a day that goes by where I go in and I feel like I'm not helping people because weather is the number one driver of energy demand. And so everything we do is basically the number one input for any team that runs a model or makes decisions. And you can see the impacts tangibly because everybody in Colorado, when I turn on my lights, that's Excel energy, and that is powered indirectly by the weather forecasts that I make. So that is something that really keeps me going because it's like when I forecast the weather, I want it to actually matter. I want it to actually help people. And working for a large utility company, I see that every single day.
And I want to touch upon that a little bit with the human impact of it, because the weather impacts everybody directly in different ways, but it also impacts other utilities and sectors differently. Can you share a story where you got to hear about the human impact of the weather or your forecasts or your work at Xcel Energy?
Now, the thing is, we don't really deal with clientele. We just deal with people internally. But I would just say, in general, we get a lot of data requests coming in or just ad hoc requests and learning about what those other teams in the company do and why weather's instrumental in driving it. That's always stuff that I just find interesting. And when it comes to the energy sector or really anyone in the weather risk realm, weather is a big financial driver. If you have accurate forecasts, you can save people thousands, if not millions of dollars. I don't exactly know what the numbers are from my perspective, but I do know that there is a lot riding on these forecasts, and you want to make sure that you're as accurate and as timely as possible. So I think just in general, being able to deliver this information to people and having them be proactive is just proof that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And again, downstream, people don't realize how complicated it is to power your homes. I think people take it for granted, but just going through different severe weather events and seeing that my lights are staying on, I think that's proof enough that we're doing a good job and people are being helped whether they realize it or not.
And I'm just curious, even though that you said you don't really work with clients as much, was there a moment where somebody showed you their appreciation for your forecast or your work? And you can expand that into your social media stuff as well, since we haven't touched upon that yet.
Yeah, for Excel, I think it's just generally just getting feedback from managers, different teams of they appreciate extra updates we do. Like we had a big cold shot during MLK weekend of this year, and I was online for extra briefings, extra updates, and being told that those are very helpful. That's stuff that makes me very happy, makes the work seem meaningful. And then on social media, I actually think that's where I really see the appreciation coming out from different people. And the thing about social media is you don't know who you're going to reach. You have the ability to reach just about anybody, especially on TikTok, where it's random who sees things and who doesn't. And one thing I remember was on August 7th, 2023, there was a moderate risk for severe weather in the Northeast. And the day after the event, I had somebody reaching out to me that said, because of your videos, like I told my office to shut down early in advance of the severe weather. And ultimately that ended up being the right call for them. So seeing stuff like that, I've had people during hurricanes, whenever I've gone on live, have said that your forecasts have made me and my family evacuate, go into safety. And it's crazy because it's like, how does one random person on social media wield as much power as I do? But that's how it is. It's like when you make these forecasts, you present yourself as an authoritative figure, then, you're someone that people will trust. And of course, it takes a long time to build the trust. But just knowing that people will trust you, on one hand, I think it's a testament to my ability to communicate the weather in a way that people can understand and can react to. But it also is somewhat scary because it's like, if they can trust me that easily, certainly they may trust people who are much less knowledgeable about the weather, and they may get steered into the wrong direction. So it's very powerful, but you have to be able to manage that.
Absolutely. And not to shamelessly plug earlier episodes, but you had mentioned Matt Lands, and we had talked about a little bit of that and the balancing of putting social media content up regarding weather forecasts, regarding weather information, and also trying to combat misinformation and disinformation. But I'm curious, how does your social media work apply to your energy work? Is there something that really surprised you that you do from social media that applies to your energy role at Excel?
I would say the social media and the professional are very much separate from one another. The social media is just something I do for fun on the side after my work is done for the day. But I will say that the one area where social media has helped me is in terms of communication. Every morning, as part of my job, I basically run briefings where I go through the weather. And so being on social media and putting a camera in my face and talking about the weather, you can't get super technical. You have to be able to explain the weather in ways that people can understand and react to. And so that's the step to make sure that somebody really knows what they're talking about, because it's one thing to know a lot of big words, to know a lot of jargon. If you don't understand what they actually mean and you can't actually explain it in a way that people understand, what's the use of it? So social media has really allowed me to take that scientific knowledge that I've learned from my education at Penn State, the education that I've studied just independently, and then apply it to the real world. So I think communication, in terms of being able to be more succinct, being able to really get down to what's important, also being livelier. I think being in front of a camera on TikTok, that's helped me overcome social anxieties that I've had, or being a naturally introverted person has brought me out of my shell. And I think that people see that not just in my day-to-day job, but also in real life too. So I think it's really been important for my personal growth. And I think another aspect of that is when you're on social media, no matter who you are, you're going to get your fair share of negative comments, dumb comments that make you want to tear your hair out. And there are a lot of different ways that you can react to. Some are better than others. But for me, I think it just gives me thicker skin and makes me more secure with who I am. And you have to be able to handle that with grace and be able to justify your positions. You have to be confident, but you can never put people down. And so, again, I think social media has been beneficial for both my personal life and my professional career. And it was just something I was doing for fun.
And it's definitely grown into something more that's just fun. It's actual useful information that people can tune into, because you have hundreds of thousands of viewers viewing your content every day. I'm curious, because both your roles with Cell Energy as an energy meteorologist and your social media stuff, they're translating the weather in different ways. I'm curious, what are the differences between translating the weather in those ways for a public audience and then for more of a specialized role in the energy industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think a lot of it goes hand in hand, but I also think that when you're a meteorologist, you really have at minimum three different jobs. You're a meteorologist, you're also an analyst, you're also a translator. I would also argue you're a firefighter, because there are always things going wrong and you have to figure it out. I'd also argue you're a programmer, developer. So there's a lot of different hats that we wear if you're a meteorologist, and people don't really get that. But the idea of being a translator is, like I was saying before, you look at all of the model data, and there's a lot that you can look at, and you really have to prioritize certain things in order to meet tight deadlines. And so you have to basically take all that information. And if I'm on TikTok, look at the model data, and then I figure out, okay, what are some graphics that look clean on social media and that people could understand? And then what are some annotations that I could put in to maybe explain my points further? And when I'm on social media, what I try to do is tell a story. So if there's a weather event that's coming in, I like to basically talk about the setup as in, okay, this is the why. Because anybody can be like, oh, this run of the GFS is showing a snowstorm 13 days out. And a lot of people do that, by the way, and it's very easy cloud. But I don't believe in that. I try to just base it on the science. So I start off by saying, okay, this is the bigger picture. This is why things are happening. And then I talk about things like affected areas, timing. I also like to talk about the risk, which is a big thing in my day-to-day job too, of like, okay, this is how things might change. And so again, the point of the TikTok is to give people accurate information, but you also have to be entertaining just because of the way the algorithms work. You have to make people want to pay attention to it, because otherwise people are just going to tune out in the first second, or not even that. That's the thing about social media algorithms. If you don't catch their attention in the first second or even millisecond, they're just going to tune away, and that's about it. So that's really that second piece that you have to, and it's a delicate dance too, because there's a problem of clickbait, like people posting outrageous graphics because they draw attention and they end up being somewhat deceiving. It is playing the game to some extent, and that's what you have to do. You have to balance being entertaining with being informative, and that's very difficult for someone to pull off, and it's something that I've tried extensively to do. And then when it comes to my day-to-day job, a lot of it is just the same thing, looking at all the model data, but then translating into their world. So like if I was talking to energy traders, I would talk about the things that they care about the most, like what things about the weather are going to be influencing demand, and what is the risk to the forecast in terms of what would be areas that I think would trend colder, areas that would trend warmer, and in different seasons that means different results to the market. Also, if you're doing a wind and a solar forecast, you want to talk about the risk. And again, all that paints the picture of making sure the lights stay on for everybody. So that idea of being a translator, I think that's universal. It's certainly probably the most important part of my job, both from the day-to-day with my regular job and then on the side with TikTok.
A lot of different things, hats, as you said, you're wearing in terms of being an energy meteorologist and also a social media meteorologist. What's a atypical translation analogy that you've used to translate the forecast or scientific concepts for people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it very much depends on the situation. Sometimes I like to throw in different analogies related to sports because that's my other area of expertise, or things that people might understand. Sometimes, like one little thing I do is whenever there's a hurricane name, I'll throw in a little picture of like whatever that name represents, just to make it a little bit fun. And yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just being very simple with the words that I use, like not using things like vorticity or other jargon, or if you do, making sure you actually explain what it is and what it represents. Because I believe that people want to learn. I believe that most people aren't dumb. And I think a lot of people would want to learn about the science. So I'm not afraid to throw in things like Eastern Pacific Oscillation or the PNA or the NAO, these different teleconnections, because I think people generally want to understand the why. But if you're going to do that, you have to have it with the stipulation of you can't just throw out these acronyms. You have to say what that means and why it's important. And that's something I do day to day as well. People just want to know how it affects them.
It's challenging to be able to tell the weather story, but like do it in a way that's informational and gets to the point. There's a lot to balance with that. And we're going to explore that a little bit more with your work with social media, talk a little bit about Excel, wrapping the two together after we come back from our break. So don't go anywhere. We still got more Everything Weather Podcast with Andrew Markowitz coming up. On this day in weather history, we revisit March 24th, 2023, one of several days of a multi-day severe weather outbreak across the southeastern United States. Specifically, we're revisiting the Rolling Fork, Winona, and Amory tornado family. On March 24th, a potent trough of low pressure in the atmosphere was moving eastward from the country's western half, producing strong wind shear and instability. At the surface, an area of low pressure was centered over Missouri and Arkansas, drawing warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico into the deep south. With all these ingredients set in place, storms began to develop ahead of the surface low's cold front. One storm would take full advantage of these ingredients and explosively developed near the Louisiana-Mississippi border. At 7:57 Central Daylight Time, the supercell storm would show signs of strong rotation and produce a violent, long-track tornado. The tornado and its parent supercell would move northeast, quickly intensifying and directly tracking through Rolling Fork, Mississippi at around 8:04 p.m. As the tornado moved through Rolling Fork, nearby weather radars picked up the tornado, lofting debris more than 13,000 feet from the town into the air. The tornado inflicted up to EF4 damage in Rolling Fork, with some buildings being partially swept clean off their foundations and other well-built businesses and structures being leveled. The tornado also tore off the roof of the Rolling Fork post office and inflicted heavy damage to the City Hall and Police Department buildings. As the tornado exited Rolling Fork, it remained violent as it moved through open fields. Here, the tornado severely scoured the earth, severing power poles and mangled and debarked a large chunk of forest to the southeast of Anglia, Mississippi. The tornado continued tracking for over 60 miles, inflicting catastrophic damage to Midnight and Silver City, Mississippi. As the tornado began to exit Silver City, it began to weaken and eventually dissipated at 9:08 p.m. east-southeast of Kruger, Mississippi. While this violent tornado was over, its parent supercell storm was far from over. It began to recycle and produce a new tornado at 9:12 p.m. in a wooded area southwest of Black Hawk, Mississippi. This second tornado quickly strengthened, uprooted, and snapped numerous trees before tracking northeast into Black Hawk at 9:15 p.m. The tornado tore directly through the town, completely destroying the Black Hawk Independent Church, the historic Black Hawk School, and a parsonage, and causing widespread tree and structural damage across the town. The tornado continued tracking northeast and eventually passed through Winona, Mississippi at 9:33 p.m. Here, the tornado intensified once more and caused heavy damage to homes and other structures. Just to the northeast of Winona, the tornado lifted upward and pivoted a concrete foundation about 15 to 20 feet from a small outbuilding. The second tornado would dissipate at 9:42 p.m. after tracking over 28 miles through central Mississippi. After almost an hour, the parent supercell would produce a third tornado at 10:38 p.m. southwest of Egypt, Mississippi. It began to quickly intensify after crossing U.S. Highway 45 west at around 10:45 p.m. At this time, nearby weather radar picked up violent rotation and debris being lofted by the tornado as it approached New Wren, Mississippi. At 10:48 p.m., the tornado tore through New Wren, destroying a church and causing significant damage to homes. At 10:53 p.m., the third tornado tracked directly through Amory, causing considerable damage to homes and trees throughout the northern half of town. The tornado would continue to rip through rural areas and eventually dissipated at 11:09 p.m. Over the next few hours, the parent supercell weakened before being overtaken and integrated into a line of Over the next few hours, the parent supercell storm weakened before being overtaken and integrated into a line of storms sweeping east. The tornado family would be responsible for producing 2 EF3 tornadoes and 1 EF4 tornado, the strongest tornado of the entire outbreak from March 24th to 27th. Between the more than 2 hours of tornadic activity from the tornado family, the 3 tornadoes claimed the lives of 22 people, injured 275 others, and caused more than $180 million in damages. 17 of those lives were lost in the Rolling Fork Silver City EF4 tornado, making it the deadliest tornado for central Mississippi in over 52 years. The last violent and deadly tornado in this area was back on February 21st, 1971. The larger outbreak from March 24th to 27th of 2023 would be responsible for $1.9 billion in total damages. Hello and welcome back to the Everything Weather Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle David, and today on the podcast we've been talking with Andrew Markowitz. He's an energy meteorologist at Excel Energy, and he's also a prominent social media meteorologist, particularly on TikTok, where he posts weather forecast and climate content, educating the people on what's to come with the weather and how they can best prepare for that. We're going to get back into that conversation, but first, I've got another fun game for you, Andrew. So we've got Keep 4, Cut 5, weather songs. So I've got 9 weather songs here. Your job is to whittle it down to 4, and the other 5 that are there get lost to the ether forever. With that, are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so on the list we have Purple Rain by Prince, Riders on the Storm by The Doors, Rain on Me by Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande, Trying to Reason with Hurricane Season by Jimmy Buffett, Let It Snow by Vaughn Monroe, but you've also heard versions by Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and others, Sandstorm by Darude, Hot and Cold by Katy Perry, Forever Winter by Taylor Swift, and Clouds by NF.
Interesting choices. First of all, let's do Let It Snow. That one's a classic. I think the Sinatra is probably my favorite version of that. But it's like anytime we get a snow, or like the first snow here, I always play it in the background. 'Cause it's just iconic.
So if you had to pick a version, you'd say the Frank Sinatra version for Let It Snow?
If so, but I think it's good all around. So either way, we're going to keep that one.
Okay. So you got 3 left to pick
The
from.
next one I'm going to pick is Sandstorm by Darude. That one, because if you've ever been to a sporting event, that's a song that really hypes people up.
Yeah, I had to throw that one in just because it's an odd one to pick and diversifies the list in terms of genres.
Yeah, and then I'm going to include the Taylor Swift because low-key I am somewhat of a Swiftie. I like a lot of her music, so I think that's a nod.
Now, we've had a few Swifties on the podcast, so you joined the list of Swifties on the Everything Weather podcast. It seems like there's more Swifties than people who like rock or metal music.
I like pretty much everything, but I like a lot of her music. I'm not afraid to admit it, so we got to have the representation there. And then the last song we're going to do is Purple Rain. That one's a classic, and it also is a good mix of both weather events and genres. So I like the 4 that we have.
Oh, so we've got quite the list here. So I'll read it down for our listeners just to keep track for them. So keeping is Purple Rain by Prince, Let It Snow, the Frank Sinatra version, Sandstorm by Darude, and Forever Winter by Taylor Swift. Those getting the axe are Riders on the Storm by The Doors, Rain on Me by Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande, Trying to Reason with Hurricane Season by Jimmy Buffett, Hot and Cold, Katy Perry, and Clouds by NF. So those 5 get lost to the ether forever, and the other 4 get to stay on the weather song list that is out there.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, so we'll take it.
It's a list. I'll give you that, and it's a good one. There's some good picks on there. So that's our second fun game. So let's get back into our conversation. We've been talking with you about your Xcel Energy experience, your experience with social media, and little known fact, we may have not touched upon this, but your hours for an energy meteorologist are demanding. You're getting up at 4:15 in the morning. And back in 2024, actually, you were live streaming until 1 a.m. in the morning. And then 3 hours later, you had to wake up for your shift for Xcel Energy. First off, how are you able to operate on such low sleep? And second off, what's a personal mantra or ritual that helps you reset after those grueling days of low sleep and high work demands?
That's what I would say is the biggest downside of energy. It's working those early morning hours. But on the other hand, you still work Monday to Friday for the most part. So I would still take those early mornings over people in broadcast or people in the weather service that work overnights, weekends, holidays. In some sense, you have somewhat of a normal life, but the problem is just waking up early. So, I mean, yeah, it's tough. And the thing about me is I also don't drink coffee or any kind of caffeine. So I basically wake up and I just get right to work with no supplements or anything. So how do I do it? I really don't know exactly. The job has to be done. I do what I got to do. But whenever I'm in the afternoons, usually I try to take a nap. I try to time it around getting a REM cycle in, getting those stages of sleep. I also enjoy working out. So I bodybuild a couple days a week in the gym. And usually that either makes me tired or if it's really good, it keeps me awake. So stuff like that, I think keeping that routine. And then also I think it's important to make sure that you have things outside of work that you can look forward to. So during the week, I also play tennis at least once a week, but usually multiple times a week. I'm in a kickball league and having those TikTok videos on the side. So just having other things to focus on stuff not related to work. I think that's what drives me. But also it's like when you're passionate about something, then naturally you're going to make sure you're up for it and doing your best job, regardless of how it is. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't tough. And is that something I want to do forever? I'm not entirely sure. For now, I think it's good. But again, there are some downsides associated with that life if you're not a morning person. I historically wasn't when I was in college, and really all the way through my first job. I was very much a night owl, and then late, and then I would basically sleep in the next day till very late. So transitioning to where, like, literally last night on a Friday, like, I would go to bed at 10 or 11 when in college I would be maybe getting to a pregame and then going out after. So that's been a pretty big adjustment from there. But, in some ways, I think being a morning person's good. Like, I actually feel more productive when I'm awake at 7, 8 in the morning and doing things before people are up. Like, usually I run errands during the week, which that's also an upside. It's like nobody's really at the grocery store at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday or Tuesday. So I don't think that lifestyle is for everybody, but if you want it bad enough, you just find a way to adapt to it.
As somebody who has worked that shift before in the broadcast world, it is a benefit to get to go to the store at 2 in the afternoon. But when you're waking up at, say, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, or at some ungodly hour in the morning or overnight hours, when everything is closed, that's when you really start to feel it. And you're like, yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, that stuff makes it tough. Now, for me, when I wake up in the morning, the first half of the day is always remote. So I don't have to drive on the streets at 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, when I'm out of the house, it's always in normal hours, which is nice, but not everybody gets that. And in terms of like those hours and having a normal life, again, like working Monday to Friday, being off on the weekend, a lot of people meet up for happy hours or going to like a basketball game during the week or a concert during the week. That stuff I usually don't do just because of the schedule. But if you're in that position, you often have to make a choice of what do I value more, my social life or my sleep? And most cases, I would default to my health in terms of I've got to make sure I'm getting at least 6 hours, which that by itself is a challenge. But again, a lot of it is just whatever your priorities are. And I think whatever role that you're in, you've got to make sure that you're focusing on your physical health, your mental health, emotional health, and all of those things ultimately come ahead of work. So you can love what you do, but you can't ignore those other things.
Agreed. And health is always a number one priority. If you're not taking care of yourself, you are certainly not able to take care of other priorities, and in the role of a meteorologist, help other people navigate the day-to-day weather.
Yep.
I'm curious, what is a high point and a low point for you in terms of experiences at Excel Energy?
I'd say a high point would be just working through different severe weather events and seeing tangibly how that positively impacts our teams and other just downstream impacts. So I think just knowing that the work we do is meaningful is a high point. And that's pretty much true for every single day. And then a low point, there's not a specific example that comes to mind, but I think whenever I miss a forecast, it's like there is, let's say there was a case where cloud cover was over a certain region, and that caused my forecast to bust 10 degrees too low, and that caused demand to be low and completely messed up the curve for the day. And stuff like that, I would be annoyed because it's maybe I should have foreseen that. But I also turn it around and think of it as a learning opportunity. So if I missed it this time, why did I miss it? And that helps me be prepared for next time when we face that situation. So sometimes getting it wrong can be the best learning experience. And one thing I found too is that people will respect you a lot more if you get things wrong and then own up to it and explain why, versus you try to justify things in a roundabout way in order to cover yourself, when in reality, it makes people not want to trust you. So trust is something that's very easy to ruin, but it's very hard to build. And so part of gaining that credibility is being able to own your mistakes and do better next time.
And I'm curious of your forecasting experience and learning from your forecast mistakes, because you said it's important to own up to those forecast errors, those times where the forecast doesn't exactly pan out. What's an experience for you where you had to explain how the forecast didn't pan out as you were expecting, and what was something you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I think the most infamous event I've actually experienced was back in high school. This was in late January 2015. There was a Miller B nor'easter that was a clipper system supposed to redevelop off the mid-Atlantic coast, and it was projected to bury basically everyone from Wilmington northeastward to New England. That was the infamous storm where Upton had forecast New York City to see 2 to 3 feet. I was actually a little bit wary going in, being on the western edge. I've seen these storms basically shift eastward at the last second before, but I was hyper focused on the Euro and the NAM showing that big storm solution. So I was like, I'm going all in. I'm going to say 6 to 12 and a guaranteed snow day for Tuesday. And up until that point, I was never wrong. So I had the reputation on the line. Basically, everybody that I was aware of had taken me verbatim. And then we had Monday, we came in, there was about an inch and a half of snow during the day, which was from that first wave coming in. We had an early dismissal, and that was expected. But then I was fixated on the radar in the afternoon, evening, and then I couldn't help but notice that everything was just missing east and shifting east. And I just had a sinking feeling that my prediction was going to go horribly wrong. But I remember just thinking of anything that would steer it back to the west. Just it was somewhat of confirmation bias, but also of being afraid of being wrong. And sure enough, that storm missed to the east. We ended up getting maybe an inch or two on the ground, and going to school at 7 o'clock in the morning the next day was a very tough thing after I'd guaranteed at least one day off. And I would say the bust was probably worse there than New York City, where they got about 10 inches when they were projected 30, but getting one instead of 6 to 12, that's a big deal. And so I guess the biggest thing I learned from that was considering the risks of the forecast instead of being all in on one solution, understanding more about where things can go wrong and expressing that uncertainty. And so learning that in high school, I think that's put me ahead of the game compared to a lot of people who may not get such an experience until later on in life. And that is something that makes me advocate strongly for, if you're a meteorology student, someone who's interested in the field, to develop some kind of social media presence. I don't think that it's required, but I do think that actually making a forecast something that you own up to is probably the best way that you can grow. And I'd argue even more so than learning different concepts in the classroom. So in the end, that's a bust that I will probably never live down, but I think it was very important for my career growth. And even though it was a decade ago and before I even went to college and took a single meteorology class.
Wow, that's a huge difference in terms of snow. And I'm thinking your classmates are probably up in arms like, Andrew, why didn't it pan out that way?
Well, yeah, the next morning I showed up to my class and I was just dejected. And I was like, yeah, I blew it. I wasn't afraid to admit it. And then I did have one of my friends who, as a joke, went on Twitter and was like, I am the new BSD weatherman. I've been dethroned. But the good thing about the winter of 2014-15 is that it was very backloaded, and we had a bunch of storms that came in between mid-February and early March. And so I had several opportunities to redeem myself, and indeed I did. So that's the great thing about weather, is that you can blow the forecast, but there's always a chance for redemption.
And also learning from your mistakes, as you highlighted earlier, is just as important. And we talked about owning up to how forecasts didn't pan out. I'm curious how you owned up in this case and how you explained why the forecast didn't verify as it did, or as you were thinking.
Well, the thing is, hindsight is 2020. It was very obvious why I missed. It was like you had the primary low, it was a clipper system, and then it redeveloped off the coast. So it was a matter of that transition was delayed. And so that caused the storm to develop about 50 miles farther east. And if you were looking at it from a worldwide perspective, it really wouldn't be much of consequence. In fact, a lot of people after the event were trashing the models, but in reality, it's really not that big of an error. The problem is that error was over one of the most densely populated areas in the world and had consequences for tens of millions of people. So the explanation is very easy. It's something that could have been foreseen, but it was just over reliance on models that at that point were very good. The Euro is still today considered the king, but it was really, I'd say that narrative was really pronounced in the early to mid 2010s, especially with Hurricane Sandy. So again, I think another takeaway is that models are not infallible. If you just rely on one thing, then eventually it's going to burn you. Sometimes it's going to work out, but not always. So you have to look at all of the different solutions and figure out what's most realistic. And sometimes there are models that perform better in some situations than others. So a lot of it is just taking all of that data and then coming to your own conclusions. So a lot of that is just your meteorological knowledge, things you learn in the classroom, but also just experience of watching different storms, how they evolve, and taking note of different things.
And you actually have a very interesting experience where you were forecasting from a very young age and you had all of this information available to you back in, say the times that maybe, I wasn't around, but at the beginning of that era. And you've seen a lot of different changes in terms of weather forecasting, how weather data is shared. What's been the most interesting thing that you've seen so far change in this new modern era of weather forecasting and communication?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So, to preface this, I would say a lot of what I learned before college was actually from the internet. So, looking at different weather blogs, weather forums, and just picking up on the things they were saying. Because I wouldn't understand a lot of what they were saying, but then slowly but surely, I was able to piece things together. And when people would post 500 millibar maps, I would not understand, like, they would look like a different language to me. But then just reading between the lines, just I wouldn't post, I would just read. And that's just what really gave me that base. And that base gave me an advantage going into Penn State and in turn going into the real world. So I think there was a lot of bad information on the internet, but if you're looking at the right places, you can really learn a lot. So I always advocate to not dismiss everything as garbage or fake news. I think there's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of good if you get rid of all the bad stuff. And how things have evolved, I think things have become a lot more readily available since like in the past decade or so. I remember I didn't really know where to get the models, so I would just wait for somebody to post a picture and then it would be very grainy and I'd have to figure out what was going on. But I think the biggest change is just the way that we consume information. People over the past decade, there's been a consistent trend of cutting the cord and not getting information from TV. Instead, they're turning to the internet, they're turning to social media. And so there are a lot of people that are stepping up as these authoritative figures on weather and are reaching a large audience. And so, again, like I've talked in the beginning of the podcast about what the downsides are associated with that, but it gives us a lot of power. And unfortunately, but you have to play the game with these algorithms. And again, that rewards people for posting outlandish content. So it really has to make you think critically about who is the source posting this? Is this someone that's reputable? And you also have to critically think of, is this something that actually makes sense? And it actually makes me think a lot about other events that I don't know about. It's like I can easily deduce if somebody is posting bad information about weather, but if we're talking about other geopolitical events or things about public health that I may not know much about, how am I supposed to know it's trustworthy? And so I would say my experience of being a content creator and also a consumer of content, that makes me a lot more critical in determining, okay, what news is actually real and what analysis actually makes sense? Who should I trust? So I think in the past decade, there has to be a lot more scrutiny in terms of where you get your information from because it's not as straightforward. And in fact, I would say people are overstimulated in terms of how much information they're getting. And also, I think with things like TikTok, a lot of the information is now coming in rapid fire and in terms of video content. So it's changing the way that we consume media. And in some ways, it's a positive thing, but in others, I think it's very negative. And in fact, we're seeing some very negative consequences of that in our society as well.
Absolutely. And not just with weather content, but just the format of content as well. A lot of things have started to shift towards that TikTokification, as some people have called it, where it's very short form, meant to be hyper stimulating in a way. I want to talk about your TikTok platform because that's where you really have grown your social media presence. What's something that stands out about TikTok compared to the other social media platforms that you have used?
I think TikTok is probably the most social media platform out of all the big players like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and whatever other subsidiaries are of that, because anybody has the potential, if you post a video, to be disseminated all around the world. It's really a mystery how the algorithm works. There are a lot of tips and tricks that people would say, but ultimately I think people have no idea. And I've been trying to study other people, read up on different things. It's really a mystery. There are some videos that blow up. I have no idea why. And then others that I'm pretty confident would blow up and they only get a couple thousand views. You just never know. So it's definitely a game of trial and error that you have to play. The thing about TikTok is I did not download it specifically to become a content creator. It just was something that happened. I downloaded it in May of 2020 or April of 2020 because I started to see that it was more than just Musically. Musically, I didn't know much about. I just thought it was like teenage people dancing to songs or lip syncing, and I don't care about that. But then I actually saw that there were some funny videos being posted, and I was like, all right, this is more like Vine. And I figured I would download, see what it was about, but then as I was getting into it, I started to realize, oh, it's actually more than just entertainment. There's actually educational content on here. And there are people that are talking about very niche things that are actually gaining some traction. And so I started to think, where are the weather influencers? I certainly think that there is demand for weather. Weather impacts everybody to some extent. And so it took me about a year, probably actually arguably more than a year, of just a lot of trial and error. Like I would post different weather content. And the thing is, when I look back at that stuff today, I very much cringe because it's terrible. But that's how you always should be. It should be whenever you look back at things from a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you should be like, wow, I've gotten so much better since then. But it was a lot of trial and error. And then eventually it was early 2022. I had a few videos that started to take off, and that just continue to grow into something more. And the thing that really made this grow was during Hurricane Ian. So Hurricane Ian, we talked a little bit about live streams. So that was the first time I really experimented with that, where I would just pick up my phone, hit the live, and I would just answer questions for hours about the hurricane. And in total, I reached a few million people. And that's where I started to realize, number one, just how much potential this account could have. But then number two, having people ask me directly, should I evacuate this place or am I going to be safe? Stuff like that makes me realize you actually have a very powerful job that not a lot of people are doing. So I consider myself to be among the pioneers of developing like a social media platform, but specifically TikTok, and getting scientists over to that platform. And because I think that there are a lot of people that have a very dismissive attitude about certain stereotypes associated with TikTok, the people that use it. And I think there's a lot more than what meets the eye. And so I've been continuously growing, trying different things. Sometimes it's been very stagnant, where I would go a few weeks and I would have videos that none of them would pop off. All it would take would be one thing to change that. And then all of a sudden I'd be reaching hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. But again, I think it's a lesson of you always have to be willing to level up. So find ways that you can improve and don't give up, because the only way to ensure failure is to stop trying, in my opinion. And if I had just stopped trying after a year of things not working, then none of this would have happened.
We haven't even gotten towards the end of our conversation, and we're already dropping some nuggets of wisdom and advice. But I'm curious, you had mentioned you got a lot of questions during these live streams. Can you share some of the most interesting questions, or maybe some of the most cringeworthy questions that you've gotten on social media?
From cringeworthy, I think the things that make me laugh, I have a map of all of like, if I have an SPC outlook of severe weather, and these are the areas with the risk. And I even put in the cities, like the major cities. And then I see someone being like New York or New Jersey. It's like, dude, just look at the map. But I have to wonder if people are just not reading things or if they literally don't know where it is on the map. So stuff like that. I try to be nice with those people because I think they genuinely want to learn. So that's probably the thing that's most cringeworthy. Or whenever people have hot takes about things they actually know nothing about, they're very confident and yet very ignorant about it. That stuff just makes me cringe. And then I think in general, when people want to learn about the science, so more like the why things are happening, because sometimes I may not have an answer right away and I have to dig on the internet or figure things out on my own. So stuff like that I think is interesting. Feels the most rewarding when I can actually be an educator, I can be a teacher, because anybody, like literally anybody, can post a screenshot of what the 12Z GFS is saying and say, "Oh, a big storm is coming to these places on this day," and yet they know nothing about it. They're just some rando. But again, I think it's important to understand the why, and I like to know that my audience is curious about that and they're not just interested in pretty colors or what's going to happen at their place in 2 days' time. So I get a wide variety of questions, and some, again, some stuff is a little cringeworthy, but those ones where people show a genuine interest in learning, those are the ones that really motivate me to keep producing content.
And you said that you enjoy being able to educate people on the weather and then also help them out. Can you share a personal experience where those social media posts actually helped a person and helped them navigate the day-to weather and then also learn about it as well?
Yeah, so in terms of helping people, I would say this year with Hurricane Helene and Milton, I was doing those streams again, just being on for hours. And I told people, it's like, if you want personal questions from me, you can DM me on Instagram. And I had literally hundreds of messages of people asking me a wide variety of things. And some of them were like, I live in this area right here. Should I evacuate? Or when will I be safe? And stuff like that. What do I think of El Nino? Like stuff like that. There are some topics that I try to shy away from. I try not to get overly political because there's enough of that out there, but I try to just keep things as objective as I possibly can. And again, I just record my things, send it out to the world, and whatever happens, that's how I look at it.
And I'm curious because you'd mentioned somebody asked you about best weather app, and I'm curious, what's a diamond in the rough weather app or website or resource that you really think should get more recognition in terms of weather forecasting and weather information?
I would say in terms of weather forecasting, there's one guy, his name is Tomer Berg, and he has a very sophisticated website with model data, things I like the most. He had a special web page for the eclipse this year that I was looking at religiously pretty much every day. And also he's got the best resource for uh, nailing down hurricane tracks. It's a super ensemble of the different GFS Euro Canadian members and stuff like that. I don't think most people are aware of, but that's, I think, the best resource for nailing down the tracks of different storms. So he does a great job. Aside from that, I don't really use weather apps. Like the forecasts that I rely on are my own, and I use that from looking at the different models. But if I did have to pick one, it would be radar scope, which there are different levels that you could get. But if you want an accurate radar, that's by far the best one. And again, there's a lot of very advanced stuff that if you're a storm chaser or a meteorologist or a weather enthusiast, it would only really apply to you. But for a layperson, the thing that's most useful is if you have a storm on radar, it will tell you down to the minute where it estimates that storm would be. So if you're someone that, like, let's say you're having an outdoor barbecue and you see a cloud to your west, you can open up this app and it will show you what the radar looks like if that storm is coming to you and what time. And I've been in many situations where I've felt ominous about storms coming in and I've decided to go home because I've seen that storm. And that's something that I think anybody can use. You don't need to have expertise to see that, but that's something that's very useful and I think very easy to use. Radar Omega also is a pretty good alternative. That one I use more so for my job, but again, it does very similar things.
And I'll just take a moment to say we'll include those apps. We'll include Tomer Berg's website as well as the Radar Scope and Radar Omega apps in the show notes for anybody who's listening to go and check out a little more. But I want to go back to what we were mentioning about trying to compete, play the algorithm on social media, and then also trying to combat misinformation and disinformation. So I have a multifaceted question for you, or multi-perspective question for you. For those listening that want to be able to learn how to better detect good and weather information on social media, what are some tips for them in terms of being able to recognize what's good and what's not good and not factual and just more clickbait?
I think first and foremost, you have to investigate what the source of the claim is. Again, I think all it takes is between 10 and 30 seconds of if you see a tweet, if you see someone's profile, to just click on it and see who they are. Because if it's someone that's, oh, I have this meteorology degree, I work for the National Weather Service, or I work for this company, it's like, all right, this person probably knows what he or she is talking about. Whereas if you click on the profile and it's just some hillbilly or whatever who doesn't have any scientific background, and because there's literally a guy who's like that, who says he's a hillbilly and he makes these crazy videos and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And it's okay, if he doesn't have a scientific background, why should I trust him? And it's like a lot of the clickbait information is stuff like, this category 5 hurricane is going to strike the United States in 14 days, or there's going to be 5 feet of snow in New York City over the next 2 weeks. You have to think critically about how likely that is going to be. You have to think about what time frame that's looking at, and you have to think about, how have I ever seen anything like that in my life? No. So why is this person treating it as if it's a certainty? So I think first and foremost, evaluate the source, and then I think do a little bit of critical thinking about where you live, what the weather's typically like, and that can tell you if something seems realistic. And also, now if it's something in the short range, that may be a little bit trickier, but again, I think the number one thing is just to vet the source, make sure that person is a reliable form of information.
And then from the other perspective, for those listeners who are trying to get into the meteorology field or already in the meteorology field, what are some tips for them in maintaining a good and trustworthy presence on social media or other online platforms?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to the point that we were making early in the podcast, and that it takes a long time to build credibility and build trust, but it can all come crashing down like a house of cards. With one bad tweet or one bad video, you can get canceled, so to speak. So in order to gain that credibility, I think you have to just speak as if you know what you're talking about. So if you're talking about a severe weather event, you're going to want to say things as succinctly as possible. The thing that I think helps and what makes me stand out is I like to annotate. If you just post a random weather graphic of the Cape, it's, who cares? What does that mean? But if you actually explain what that means and why that matters, then then a layperson would be like, okay, this person knows the science and can explain things to me in a way that understands. He probably, or she probably, knows what they're talking about. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it is you just need to be present. You need to be, whenever there is an event, be someone that is there for people. That doesn't mean you have to be there for every single one. If you're too busy with life, then don't worry about it if you're not there. But again, just being active and at least being in tune to different things, and slowly but surely people will see that and you'll be able to build up a following. It's something that takes months or probably years to build.
Definitely. And looking at top of the mountain, the social media and energy meteorology mountain that you've climbed, let's look back now down where you've climbed from. You had mentioned that your bar mitzvah was impacted by the December 2009 storm. You had explained a little bit what it was. It was the ceremony of a boy becoming a man. Was there a weather bar mitzvah for you that kind of signified the transition from a young student learning about the meteorology to a full-fledged weather professional? And what's something you've learned from that transition?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question. I would actually say it was going to my first job. I was in a unique situation where I had gone through interviews and there was one person on staff at the time. And I thought, okay, I'm going to work under him and I would learn from him. He was a Penn State guy. I think that's honestly probably why I got the job. In fact, my manager said directly, the guy was like Penn State, top of the pile. And I was going in thinking I would be his protege. And then a few weeks before I started, I took a visit to Annapolis to scope out the area and say hi to my team. And I realized that the guy that I was supposed to be learning from was leaving. And so that meant that on day one of my career, I was a team of one. I was the subject matter expert. And that was really the point where it was like, oh, I'm actually forecasting the weather for real. This is something that actually matters and people are actually going to listen to me. And so that actually, I find throwing you to the fire is the best way to learn, because you don't have a choice. You have to do it. And if you don't do it, then that's going to cause issues. And so that, I think, was a big thing that really helped me get up to speed quickly, probably faster than anybody has really expected. And I'd say the first big event that I had to do was Hurricane Dorian, which was in early September of 2020 or 2019. I was staying late just to make sure that these alerts that were sent out were very thorough and that people could take action from it. I ended up getting some good reviews from my manager about it. So that was probably right away. I didn't have time to get my feet wet, learn under somebody. I had to learn it all on my own. That was a high pressure situation, but that's a transition to the real world where things got real very quickly.
Wow, that's huge throwing into the fire moment right there.
Yeah, it is. And I'd say it also happened in my second job at Wood Mackenzie, the one in Boston, because I started the very end of January 2021. And thankfully, this was a team of four. So this one I actually had a little bit of training. But if you remember, a few weeks later was the February 21 polar vortex event, which ultimately caused the Texas grid to fail. And I was, I think, in my second full week of actually doing things on my own. And I had this black swan event that I had to forecast for. And I was like, there's no analogs for this. And I just had to send it, see what would happen. And that's an event people still talk about to this day and probably will never forget. So again, it's another example of being thrown into the fire. And that's the best way to learn. It's good to have people over you who can give you feedback, but ultimately you don't want to have people holding your hand. You have to just do it and whatever happens.
That's some good advice for navigating those, as you said, throw into the fire moments. And to look back on all of your different experiences, what's the one piece of advice that you were given by a mentor, somebody you've worked with that you still carry on to this day?
I think the biggest thing that I can relate to personally is being open to any and every opportunity. For me, in order to get to where I was, I had to move 3 times between 2019 and 2022. And people don't talk about a lot of the challenges associated with moving, which involves in every single place. I really didn't know a lot of people or really anybody. In fact, Denver, I knew zero. But the idea is if you only limit yourself to a very narrow scope of cities you want to live in, you only want to live within 30 minutes of your home, or you only want to work in the National Weather Service, or for this company, they're really stifling your career growth. You are really limiting your potential. So you have to be open to not just location, because I think in this field, it's an inevitability that you're going to move unless you just luck into something really good or something, or you just happen to live in a big city that's a hub for weather. But for the most part, you're going to have to move and likely move multiple times. And so you have to be willing to do that. You also have to be open to different roles, even things that are not necessarily weather related, but weather adjacent. The thing about your weather degree is that you take a lot of calculus, you take physics, you take chemistry, you take statistics, you take programming, you may even take econ, business, or finance classes. And so you think about that background, and that actually opens up a lot of doors that go way beyond meteorology. And that's a lot of things that people don't think about. So again, when people ask about how the job market is, I think it's about as good as you make it. And if you know where to look and if you're open to different possibilities, then I think the sky's the limit here. And again, I think I'm living proof that if you're proactive, if you're really willing to grind in your career and you're willing to make personal sacrifices, then you can progress very quickly.
That's some good advice there. And on that note, we've got a little segment that we're starting to develop called the Sunset segment, where I open the floor for everybody on the podcast. So this is our Sunset segment where I open the floor to you. Are there any things that you feel we've left out, unsaid? Are there any weather myths you want to bust? Parting piece of advice. We talked a little bit. You mentioned a little bit about paying off your student loans, maybe a quick money hack or trick that you've learned, or just any final parting thoughts before we go into our last segment.
Yeah, so about the finance piece, and when it came to various sacrifices, the biggest sacrifice I had to make was related to paying off an extraordinary amount of student debt. I graduated from Penn State out of state tuition with $130,000 of student loan debt. And this is something that I think a lot of people would get very depressed about, or they would think it's very hopeless. And again, I'm not going to lie, and there were moments where I felt that way too, but ultimately, I wanted to be proactive and not reactive. And I was like, you know what? I want to make it a mission to pay off this debt as soon as possible. And so I created an Excel spreadsheet. I was like, this is the max that I could pay every single month. And I would basically, for the 6 months after I graduated, I didn't have to pay back anything. So I could just build that emergency fund. And I basically just used that as a base, saved as much as I could. Then by this day, I will be free to live my life. And that's something that motivated me to go to these other jobs, because it was like, yeah, I'm happy with my current role, but financial freedom is something that you don't want to take for granted. In fact, it's something very few people can truly achieve. And so that was mainly the motivation for leaving. I wanted to get into energy, but that's something that I think you have to think about your personal life too. And in order to do the things that I really wanted, I was like, I can really sacrifice for a few years, or what looked like several years, and then eventually it's going to pay off. And so by being persistent with this habit of paying the maximum every single month, and it came at the cost of different things. Like, I would say no to various social events if I didn't think I could afford it. I didn't really travel anywhere for a while, or if I did, it would be heavily subsidized. And was like, I can suffer, and then once this is paid off, then I can basically do whatever I want. And so again, by being persistent with this, there was also some assistance from COVID related relief programs that both presidents helped put into place. So freezing interest rates for a little bit, the stimulus checks, they were all used to pay down the loans. Just being deadly persistent, like my life depended on it, was just something that it really stunk in the moment, but it really paid off. And so I started paying it off in late 2019, and I finished in August 2023 in under 4 years. And so once that was done, I felt like I could do whatever I want. And so the biggest thing that I wanted to do was travel, see the world. And I'm like, all this money, which was as much as $4,000 a month that I was paying toward loans, now I know what it's like to budget. Now I can be financially smart, and I can basically do whatever I want. The money that I was paying for loans, now I can actually spend on things that are fun. And so I went from living with roommates, which was another sacrifice, because it was like, yeah, like there are pluses to it, but I like my independence. So going from living with roommates to an independent living situation is one. But aside from that, nothing has really changed. So I actually think in some ways having the loans was good in order to build these habits that have really set me up in terms of being able to budget, save a lot of money, but also it's very important to invest, even a little bit. And when I say investing, that can be in terms of stocks, which I made some money betting on things in the market, but also more so in terms of 401k, IRA, because when it comes to things like interest, that's an extremely powerful thing. And that goes both ways. So when it comes to student loans, that's what ultimately keeps people down. It's not so much the principal, it's the interest. And you have to, at the very least, get out ahead of the interest so you're actually making progress. But in terms of investing, if you get a certain rate of return every year. And so the money that you're putting in, obviously there's going to be some ups and downs depending on how the market behaves. But as a whole, it's always going to go up. And so the money that you put in starting as early as possible, that's going to keep growing and growing. And by the time you get a few decades down the road, it's going to be a lot of money that's going to be available to you. So always making sure that I invest. Now I max out everything. And also I'd say avoiding any kind of credit card debt, because that really cripples people, and it cripples people unnecessarily. So again, the financial piece is very important. And that's a big reason. I'd say probably the number one reason I did not do broadcast, or I would even argue NWS. The money just was not good enough. And it's a real shame, because those people work hard. They deserve more. They do multiple jobs at once. But unfortunately, that's reality, and I don't really see it changing anytime soon. Now, one quick aside, though, for people in broadcast is that I would actually argue that today could actually be the best time to get into broadcast, because there are so many people leaving the industry. There are actually a lot of voids in higher markets. And so if you are someone who is 21, 22, about to graduate, you can move up into higher markets quicker than ever before. And once you get to higher markets, the pay ends up being very good. So I don't think that, or I think when people say avoid broadcast entirely, they're being a little bit too dismissive, because I have seen it even with some of my friends moving from markets in the 100s to the top 10 in a matter of under 5 years. So I guess that's my spiel here, but yeah, the financial piece is very important, and not even in terms of the amounts, because there is a certain point where additional money is not going to buy you happiness. But in terms of, you got to make sure that you have something to pay the bills and also to live your life, because weather, I'd say it is a big part of my life, but it's not the only part of my life. You have to be able to have fun in other ways.
Wow, a lot of good advice there, not just financial advice for our non-weather listeners and weather listeners, but also some broadcast advice that's very interesting as well. So with that, the sun is setting on our conversation and our episode, but it is not the end of the episode just yet. We've got one more fun game for you to send you off, the listeners and you, Andrew. We've got our whether or not trivia, where we have a mix of weather-themed and non-weather themed trivia questions, and there are a mix of things that you are interested in inside of and outside of the weather. With that said, are you ready to kick off our final game?
All right, let's do it.
This is whether or not your question is related to pickleball. Where was the game pickleball invented? Was it A, Brainbridge Island in Washington, B, Palm Springs, California, C, Boca Raton, Florida, or D, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania?
Oh, actually, so I have a friend who went to college in Washington, and I think I remember him saying something about like pickleball was first big in the Seattle area and then expanded. So I want to say Washington. I don't know where the town is, but I'd guess Washington.
So Brainbridge Island, Washington is your final guess?
I'll go with that.
You are correct. It is Brainbridge Island in Washington. It was invented in 1965. So your friend helped you out with that trivia question.
I will take that.
All right. This is whether or not your next question is related to 2020 hurricanes. Which of the following names was not retired from the list of names for the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season? Was it A, Laura, B, Ada, C, Isaias, or D, Iota?
That one, it was not retired.
Not retired.
So this one was controversial, but Isaias, because that one was a pretty damaging storm on the East Coast, but I think it was overshadowed by some of these other ones. So I know that one's the correct answer. And that one I thought could go either way. Like, it wasn't a strong storm, but it did a lot of damage. I actually storm chased that one too at the Delaware beaches.
So I won't even confirm that your answer choice because you gave your good reasoning there. So you are correct. It is Isaias. And little fun fact, I also tried to go storm chasing that day. Unfortunately, it was stopped by a downed tree in my neighborhood with power lines. I could not go out and storm chase on
Rip.
Isaias. Yeah. Have a bad experience with downed trees somehow with storm chasing, but that's a story for another time. All right. That's 2 down. We've got 3 more for you. This is whether or not your next question is related to the Mets, who appeared in 152 games for the 2021 New York Mets season. Was it A, Jonathan Villar, B, Pete Alonso, C, Michael Conforto, or D, Jeff McNeil?
2021, all those guys. I'm between 2 here. I think it's either the polar bear or McNeil, because both of them have stayed relatively healthy.
Who's the polar bear? Because I
Alonso. It's one of those.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna go with Alonso.
Pete Alonso, the polar bear, is your final guess?
Yeah.
You are correct. It is the polar bear, Pete Alonso. So you are now 3 for 3. Let's see how you do with these next 2. This is whether or not your next question is related to the December 2009 snowstorm, the one snowstorm that affected your bar mitzvah. The snowstorm, known as the Snowpocalypse, brought record snowfall to the eastern United States from December 16th through the 20th. Which city had a 100-year record broken for largest single December snowstorm? Was that city A, Dover, Delaware, B, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, C, Boston, Massachusetts, or D, the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C.?
So it's only one of those.
One of those had its 100-year-old record broken for largest single December snowstorm.
As in the previous record was 100 years before that?
Yes.
December 1909, I have remember hearing about that. Let's see. It's not Boston, because Boston, I think, got 10 inches from that. I'm going to say, oh no, it's got to be Philly at 23. I'm going to say Philly.
Philly's your final guess?
Yeah.
You are correct. It was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You are now at 4 for 4. Let's see how you do with this last question.
Well, actually, now I'm curious about what the records were in DC and Dover. I'll have to look it up after the podcast.
To my knowledge offhand, they did have records broken, but it wasn't like this record that was broken in Philadelphia where it was standing for 100 years. Multiple daily snowfall records were broken in, I believe, all of those cities, but nothing like this record, that 100-year record for largest single December snowstorm. So a lot of records there to look at after the podcast and for our listeners as well. All right. With that said, this is whether or not your last question is related to rap music. Which artist won the Grammy Award for Best Rap Song in 2025? Was it A, Kendrick Lamar, B, Playboi Carti, C, Rhapsody, or D, Lil Ronnie?
Yeah, it's Kendrick. Kendrick's had a banner year.
Kendrick Lamar is your final guess?
Yep.
You are correct. It is Kendrick Lamar. He won the Grammy Award for his song Not Like Us. So that is a clean sweep of the Whether or Not trivia. How are you feeling about that, Andrew?
I mean, I was a little nervous because it was like if I screwed up one of these specialties, I wouldn't be able to live it down. So we came out of this alive.
And you get to join the Hall of Fame for clean sweeps of the Whether or Not, which is slowly growing as we do this podcast. Yeah, you are the next person to join the clean sweep on the Whether or Not trivia, and I'll have to make a list of who has joined that prestigious Hall of Fame. So with that brings us to the end of the Whether or Not trivia and the end of the podcast episode and our conversation. But before we go, how can people stay in touch with you and all that you're doing, Andrew?
Yeah, so everybody is welcome to follow me on social media. So TikTok at Andrew Markowitz, or Andrew Markowitz 96. Twitter is at @AMarkowitzWX, and Instagram at Andrew Markowitz WX. You can also look at me on LinkedIn for more professional stuff. And if you're someone that is either interested in meteorology or is looking for different opportunities, I'm always happy to take on different mentees, because being a mentee and seeing how much it's helped me grow, it's made me want to give back to the next generation. So I'm always happy to answer questions people have about the weather or the industry, and I'll do my best to get back to you if you do decide to reach out.
And we'll make sure to include all of your social media links and your LinkedIn down in the show notes for everybody to go and check out. With that said, thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on to the Everything Weather podcast, and thank you to the listener for listening to the Everything Weather podcast. And we'll catch you on the next episode.